Hello, everyone. So I got 40 slides and 15 minutes to try to explain a pretty dense subject. So let's start with a controversial statement. The merge happened, everyone's happy, proof of stake is now live on Ethereum, but it almost didn't happen. I'm going to tell you why. So there's been three, in my opinion, extremely severe situations that actually threatened the Ethereum protocol. First one was in 2016, the DAO hard fork. Everyone knows about that. That was when Ethereum's immutability was violated. After a hack, the people who lost their money got their funds returned to them through a hard fork. In 2016, in September, the Shanghai hacks happened. This was a time that was extremely intense for developers, and Ethereum's availability was threatened. The network almost went down, and Ethereum developers remember this day very intensely. Now, the third largest threat to Ethereum in its history, in my opinion, actually happened last month. And I call it the Black Flag Week of Ethereum. And this is when Ethereum's neutrality came at risk in a very serious way. By the way, this image that you just saw, something that's pretty interesting, this is a drawing that I drew in Paint. And I asked the artificial intelligence engine to render this image from that painting. And the interesting thing is that, so these Ethereum miners that used to be making the blocks, you see the frequency of blocks here after proof of stake. Now we're using clock to make blocks. We're not mining anymore. So what happened to those miners? Are those miners just gone, or are they still here with us? Actually, this image was rendered by those ETH miners. Instead of just throwing away their hardware, they've repurposed that hardware to render these kinds of images. That helps me to tell the story. So we know that there's a bunch of awesome things with proof of stake. There's less issuance when we're mining. Like there's less ether that is getting mined by the protocol, and we're not hurting the environment anymore. So what's the danger? Well, what you have to remember is that when proof of stake launched, it was like trying to change the wheels on an airplane. Actually, it was sort of like trying to change the wheels on 5 airplanes at 5 times, because we have 5 different consensus clients that all need to do this in synchrony with each other. And just 1 month before proof of stake was supposed to go live, Alexei Pertsev was jailed in the Netherlands for being a developer that built the Tornado Cash mixing service. This means that the Ethereum system is now under direct threat by the US government. So many DeFi applications started to filter transactions that had anything to do with Tornado Cash. So you might have seen that there were Ethereum influencers, and Justin Sun actually couldn't use DeFi applications anymore because someone dusted their wallets with some bit of ether that had interacted with the Tornado Cash system. And we also found out that Flashbots, which is the primary block builder in Ethereum, is also censoring transactions from entering the protocol. So we can see that right now in proof of stake, the amount of validators that use Flashbots is increasing. This is just 8 days apart. We can see that these validators are increasingly using Flashbots, which is censoring transactions, and I think it's going to reach 80% not long from now. So an extremely worrying tweet in this context was from Brian Armstrong that said, well, we're obviously going to follow the law. If there's sanctions, we need to abide by that. And what's the issue with this? Well, the issue is that Coinbase runs one of the largest validators. Apart from being an exchange, they're one of the largest validators in the Ethereum network. And we know that there are miners that already today don't include transactions from Tornado Cash. But when we use proof of work, you look at, this is the distribution of hash rate. So there's a bunch of different pools when we're using mining, but in proof of stake, what are the actors here? So it's actually exchanges. So we have Coinbase, Kraken, Binance, and they are typically in regulated jurisdictions where they have to abide by various rules. So right now, this is an epoch in proof of stake. There's 32 blocks in each epoch. Coinbase is making roughly 6 of those blocks. Binance is making 1, Kraken is making 3. That's 10 blocks per epoch. That's actually enough blocks to censor You only need about a third of the validators in proof of stake to censor the protocol. And those 3 exchanges actually have enough stake in the system to censor transactions if they wanted to. So when I say that the merge almost didn't happen, it's actually because we were going into a situation where there's enough validators in control of the stake that may have to comply with OFAC regulation and censor transactions from entering the protocol. And this would destroy the entire value proposition of Ethereum as a decentralized, censorship-resistant platform for smart contracts. And I usually describe crypto like it's an amazing, like it's the most exciting movie that I've ever watched. And we get to enjoy this really exciting movie on the front row seat. But sometimes it feels like you just want to scream at the screen. By the way, this is also, the reason that this image looks so horrible is because it's also one of these AI-generated images. And the reason I want to scream at the screen is that we've always said that in proof of stake, how we will deal with this type of attack is that we're going to remove the stake of a validator that is engaging in censorship in the network. That is how Vitalik has talked about it since 2017. This is the reason that I liked proof of stake, is because we have the ability to selectively remove individual validators that are threatening the protocol. So we usually say that in proof of stake, we have this surgical weapon that we can look at which particular stake is censoring, and we can remove that particular validator individually, and we don't have to change the proof of work function and destroy the entire system. So a lot of people will say, well, you know, how can you slash an actor like Coinbase? That's like billions of dollars that actually don't, all of it doesn't even belong to Coinbase. They belong to particular clients of Coinbase. So you would have to slash the stakes of individual retail people. Well, there's a military doctrine called mutually assured destruction. And this doctrine assures that if we have a credible enough threat to the enemy, we may never have to use it. That's the hopeful idea, that if we make a credible enough deterrent to censor the protocol, then we may never even have to suffer censorship in the protocol. But that threat has to be credible. We have to inform these exchanges that we do not tolerate censorship in the network in order, and we have to make a credible description of how we're going to address the situation in which they're censoring the protocol. Because what's the alternative? Like, what is the reason that Ethereum has any value? I think, like, a lot of people will say, well, it's because you buy Ether so that you can run smart contracts on the platform. I actually don't think that that's the primary driver of value in Ethereum. I think Ether, the asset, is valuable because Bitcoin is valuable. Bitcoin is valuable because it's a non-government asset that you can transfer to anyone in the world. It's not regulated by the government who you can transact with. And the reason that Ethereum is valuable is because it's also addressing that use case. So if we start censoring in the protocol, what is even the value that is left in the Ethereum system? So I started a poll to see how do other people in the Ethereum community think about this? So how should we act in a situation where Binance, Coinbase, Kraken are censoring the protocol? Are we just going to let them censor, or are we actually going to fork the protocol and delete those validators' stake? And you can see that 61% of the 10,000 people that participated in this poll actually thinks that we should slash those attackers. Even Vitalik Buterin voted for X. And X was the option of actually slashing the stake of the attacker. And this had pretty much immediate results. Just one day after, Brian Armstrong commented, well, if that's the situation, then we're not going to censor the protocol. We're actually going to remove our validators from the system to avoid this situation altogether. So we're already seeing that by pressuring them, by informing them that if they censor, we will slash their stakes, they do take a more dovish approach and say that we'll remove ourselves from the staking situation altogether. This is very good. We need to see more of this. And this is how the Black Flag movement of Ethereum started. This is a symbol of resistance that informs validators in the protocol that if they don't preserve the values that make Ethereum valuable, we will destroy their stakes. Right now, we have the benefit that the chief legal officer of Coinbase doesn't think that there's anything in the OFAC law that necessarily requires them to censor transactions. But this means that it's basically up to the interpretation of Coinbase's legal team whether or not this is going to be a problem. Right now, they don't think that they have to censor, but what if OFAC, the US government, makes a statement that you're not allowed to process transactions that have any involvement with mixing services? And the issue here, the reason that this has become such a problem is because those mixing tools that are supposed to provide anonymity in the protocol are also being used by, say, actors like North Korea. So the US government doesn't like that North Korea are using the same mixing tools that give you and me privacy. And therefore, there's a big chance that we're going to have to fight this at the protocol layer. But what's really important to remember here is that not even SWIFT applies OFAC regulations at the validator level. And the reason for that is pretty simple. You can't have a cross-jurisdiction messaging layer or transfer layer for transactions that applies each and every regulation of each and every jurisdiction. Because if that was the case, then the EU can't process transactions that the US thinks are sanctioned, and the US can't process transactions that any other member thinks are not allowed, because you can't filter, you can't accommodate the regulation of each and every jurisdiction. If you think about, so how do we comply with North Korean regulation and Chinese regulation and US regulation all at the same time? You're going to end up with a network that can't transact at all. So what you can do is that those individual institutions, like exchanges and custodians that are in specific jurisdictions, they can still apply KYC and abide by whichever regulations that they are required to comply with in their jurisdictions. But we cannot have a network level type censorship that is trying to comply with all different countries at the same time. That type of system doesn't work to make transactions on. So there is really no alternative here. We have to preserve the neutrality of the protocol. And the way to do that is by giving a credible threat to validators that engage in censorship, by informing them that we will fork the protocol and remove those validators' stakes. Already now, there are validators in Ethereum that are censoring transactions. This is a chart of blocks that are being made by specific validators in the Ethereum system. And these missing green bars here, these are validators that are completely avoiding to include any Tornado Cash transactions. And you remember that chart that I showed you previously? That the Flashbots block builder that is relaying blocks to all the other validators to include in the system, they censor OFAC transactions, OFAC transactions in the protocol. And it's very likely that just a couple of months from now, we're going to have around 80% censorship in the Ethereum system. And we need to make sure that that figure doesn't reach 100%. And so I think this is a good time to think about, what is the reason that you're interested in Ethereum? What are the values that brought you to this movement? Wasn't it always that decentralization and censorship resistance was the key properties that made these assets valuable, that made these any different from the existing traditional financial system? That is why I think that you should talk to other people, that you should talk with investors, you should talk with your founders, you should talk with your colleagues in this industry. Try to make a good argument for why we have to make a credible threat to validators in the system not to censor the protocol. I'm out of time. I made it. Thank you.